Thank you so much. It's great to be back here at one of my favorite events of the year. So Don Harrison, welcome to the Startup Grind.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Don, you are the vice president at Google responsible for corporate development, all of Google's M&A, as well as Google for Entrepreneurs, who is a proud global partner powering Startup Grind. You've had a fascinating journey at Google that's been really over a decade in the making. But I want to rewind a little bit earlier and ask you, what was your first job and what did you learn from it?
So my first job, so I'm Canadian. My first job, which seems is not a surprising Canadian job, but I was a tree planter, which meant that I went about 600 miles in on logging roads and lived for 10 weeks at a time planting trees. And I learned there that being in the outdoors is great for about 2.5 days. And then having to get up every morning and know that you plant 2,000 trees or you don't make any money or get fed quickly made me realize that I needed to go back to school and reinvest myself. I did love tree planting, but it also made me want to not be a tree planter for my entire life.
So you did go back to school. You went to law school as well, and you worked at Wilson Sonsini, where you first met Larry and Sergey prior to working on the IPO. So tell me about your first impressions of the Google founders.
Yeah, so I sort of met Larry and Sergey a few times in connection with some of the early M&A deals we did for Google, but I really got to work closely with them on the initial public offering. A couple first impressions. First of all, they were, absolutely fearless. You would sit in these rooms where, the two of them would be surrounded by, 20, 30, 40 bankers, and it was, pretty high pressure environment, and they were not afraid to hold forth with their ideas, their thoughts. And in that process, it's interesting because I really realized that they, fundamentally tackle every problem, on a first principles basis, meaning that, they don't sort of care what's been done before. They don't care what the conventional wisdom is. They want to know what the problem is, and then they sort of come up with their own conclusion on how best to solve it, and you better have good reasons or good arguments why that's not a good solution, or they quickly sort of lose faith in you. And in an IPO process, that's a process that it's evolved over 80 years. And to see those two kind of, going head to head, with bankers, was pretty inspiring and, pretty educational in terms of me learning how to tackle problems myself. That IPO process was pretty hard. They chose to do everything different than you do conventionally. We didn't use a conventional book writing process. We did an auction process that everyone could participate in. They wrote a founder's letter, which I still recommend people read today. At the front of the prospectus, it was essentially a letter that said, "Don't buy our shares," and that didn't go over very well with the bankers either. So, I learned from them, how to tackle problems. I also, was always they're compassionate. They,
Absolutely.
Sergey tried to, after being up for 48 hours, tried to get me to go home once. And it was this horrible moment as a junior lawyer because the client is saying, "Go home, you're too tired, you can't do this any longer." But we were sort of 48 hours up against a deadline. And luckily I didn't go home, or I just sort of avoided him and snuck into a side room. But, they're compassionate as well.
So fast forward now a little over a decade, and you are currently responsible for M&A. So let's talk about Google's strategy there. And I know it's very much about finding unique talent, unique technology. Tell us about the general strategy behind Corp Dev at Google.
Sure. So, and I'm sure that I always say it, and it can be a bit trite, but I'll say it again. The fundamental approach we try to take is applying what we call the toothbrush test. The toothbrush test is simple. It asks, is this something you use daily? Does it solve a real problem? And can it scale to tens to hundreds to billions of users? And any product that meets that test is something that we're interested in. That sort of product focus and thesis really sort of drives all of our M&A decisions. We ask ourselves, when we're looking at a new product, is this something that will help our platforms? Is it something that will make the web faster, better, safer? We also ask ourselves whether or not this is a product that can be, helpful to an existing product area or possibly create a new product area. I think of Android as an example of an acquisition we did that then grew into, one of the most important product areas we have. YouTube as well is an example of that. And sort of related to that thesis, and just as you guys are thinking about your own companies, whenever we go to deal review, whenever we think about a deal, the first thing that we think about is, I tell the sponsoring product lead or executive that wants to bring the deal forward, think about your product strategy, because that will be the first thing that we talk about at deal review. It won't be the company, it won't be the financials, it'll be what is your product strategy and what is your product vision. If you sell that product strategy and vision, and the company that we're talking about fits into that product strategy and vision, then it will be a successful deal review. If you don't sell on that vision or strategy, it usually is not a company that we're interested in. The final thing I'll say about what we look for in M&A is that we believe in the entrepreneur. We passionately think that type of person, reintroducing that person to Google through M&A or through a variety of means, but including M&A, is how we sort of keep vibrant, how we keep innovation at kind of the forefront of what we're trying to do. And there's two recent examples of that. Diane Green, formerly of VMware, but also of Bebop, is a deal we just did over the holidays, and she's now leading our enterprise efforts. JG, John Andrea, is also leading up our search. I only ever call him JG, so you'll have to apologize. But he's now leading up our search, and he came in through an acquisition called MetaWeb. We think adding entrepreneurs is really important to keeping innovation on the forefront of what we do.
So Don, you've worked on over 100 transactions at Google, both on the legal side, now leading M&A. Can you tell us, I know there's fascinating stories behind some of the deals. Can you share with us a favorite story of working on a merger acquisition?
Yeah, there's, and this sort of came to the forefront, it's like my little connection to Steve Jobs. And it's kind of, we bought a company called AdMob, and AdMob was being pursued by two companies aggressively, sort of us and Apple. And Omar Hamoy was the leader of AdMob, and Steve Jobs, had really put the pressure on him to come join Apple, and for a variety of reasons, we were able to sort of bring him away. But during the last sort of 24 hours of the negotiation, Steve Jobs kept calling Omar, and we were in negotiations over difficult issues, and whenever I kind of tried to argue with him, his phone would ring and he'd hold it up and there'd be sort of Steve Jobs, and then I would concede the point. Whatever the point was, I would immediately concede.
No response needed.
If somehow you can create that dynamic in your negotiations, it is effective. And it was effective for Omar as well, too.
So many of these deals are obviously super competitive, as with the AdMob example. So what is your pitch to exceptional entrepreneurs, and how does your team support them once they join Google?
Yeah, so it varies from deal to deal, but I think there are kind of three main ways that we're able to kind of sell entrepreneurs and why they should come inside. The first two I sort of capture by think big but act small. The think big is Google has a lot of resources, a lot of ability to distribute products, a lot of things that we can bring to bear to help your product or technology or service have a very broad impact to a broad variety of users. And so we can bring those resources to bear. But the act small is we believe in that small unit, that small startup unit led by entrepreneurs. We think that can move forward great products about as fast as any other kind of form of innovation at a company. And because we believe in it, and because we're willing to keep teams together and entrepreneurs focused on their product mission, that's appealing to people that are starting to come into the company. The third thing is that we're patient. We're willing to make big bets, and big bets is not only just financial resources, but it's also the time we're willing to give to allow a product or service or technology to achieve its vision. And kind of those things, when we are successful, those three things usually resonate with the entrepreneurs we're talking to.
So why do most deals fail, or what would make you walk away from a transaction?
Yeah, that can be difficult. I would say that the main reason why we walk away from deals, first of all, we do a fair bit of homework at the upfront. We have a good deal review process where we have I won't issue a term sheet unless we're pretty sure we want to buy the company, and our success rate's pretty high there. I think what causes us to lose deals or for deals to fall apart is sort of what I call a dislocation. When founders sit down and sort of sell their vision and sell their company, we usually take that at face value. You know your company better than anyone, and when you tell us its strengths and its weaknesses, we we believe that but M&A is an exhaustive process. By the end of it, we know your company very, very well. And when there's gaps in that story, when we find that what you told us doesn't match what we found, those dislocations are where deals fall apart. Entrepreneurs, founders are supposed to be in sell mode. We want to get caught up in their vision and the articulation of that vision as well too. But don't oversell or create a moment where we find out something that differs from the story that we were told.
Be congruent with reality.
Yep.
So what are you thinking about right now? What emerging product area or technology are you most excited and bullish on?
So there's two right now. I mean, I think I'm involved with Magic Leap, and that's augmented reality. I'm also involved with our efforts at Google around virtual reality, and I've drunk the Kool-Aid there. I actually think that will fundamentally change computer-human interactions, computer-human interfaces. I just think that there's such a lower power requirement, lower material requirement by putting screens and the ability to see images in something like this, even if tethered to a computer, and think that will fundamentally change everything. These things disappear, computer screens disappear. It really fundamentally changes things. I don't know whether that's 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, but I'm really excited about that space. And I've also spent a lot of time on machine intelligence. I mean, DeepMind was a huge focus, also complementing JG's efforts around machine intelligence at Google. And I think we're right at the forefront there of seeing huge changes as a result of that.
Great. So I want to shift gears a bit and talk a little bit about how you manage your time and how you run your team. So what do you look for when building a team? What do you look for in potential hires?
So personally, I believe in the athlete, meaning that when I sit down with someone, I want to believe that they're a good generalist. I don't look for a specialized skill or specialized experience background. I want to hear them. I mean, it sort of comes from the Larry and Sergey conversation. I want to hear them wrestle with problems, give good examples, demonstrate kind of emergent intelligence, emergent leadership, where when wrestling with something new, you spend the time to really think about the problem and then hopefully advance some novel ideas or thoughts about how to solve it. That's what I look for. I also specifically with M&A and my M&A team, a lot of what they do is almost like, it's stewardship, right? The founders, people in this room probably included, are a fairly idiosyncratic bunch. They come with their issues and they need to be helped through a very difficult process, which is M&A. And so the first thing I want is people that, I don't want hard-nosed, hard-edged. I want people that are going to help guide the startup team that we're trying to acquire through a difficult process and get them to the other side.
That's great. One of the things that I've noticed in working with you and I've remarked on is you're incredibly punctual and highly responsive. So can you give us one or two of your life hacks for how you prioritize? Right. How do you manage your time?
Yeah, so my wife, my family would not share that description of me at all. But so I used to be awful. I mean, lawyers are awful. I'm 3 years recovering from being a lawyer, but we are always 5 minutes late for a meeting, and by 5 minutes, that can mean anywhere from 5 minutes to 2 hours. But I have learned two things. I manage my inbox, my email inbox. Email, as awful as it is, I manage it to 0 every week because it's how I keep track of things. And if I don't manage it to 0, sometimes I give myself a week or two. I declare bankruptcy, delete all my emails, and start over again, because otherwise there's just no way to stay on top of the flow of everything. I also use old-fashioned pen and paper. I write lists, and I track through the lists and get through everything. And then I just follow whatever my calendar says. That's where I go, and I try to be there on time. But there's just so many things you deal with on a daily basis that without those kind of rules, I find I get overwhelmed. And I think technology generally, the issues that we wrestle with come from every direction. And if you don't kind of be more militant about managing your own time, John Doerr being the greatest example of that, a guy that militantly keeps track of every moment of every day, you're not going to get done what you need to get done.
So speaking of paper and the written word, what book are you reading right now, or what book would you maybe recommend to our audience?
All right, so the book I'm reading right now is the Mars trilogy. I'm involved with SpaceX, and an article about that went around recently, and then I had a friend send me the Mars trilogy, which is about the colonization of Mars. Plus, I'm a sci-fi nut, so I read sci-fi a lot. What I recommend, first of all, stemming back from the VR, AR discussion, everyone should read Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, because it's coming true. And then, because I'm Canadian, I have to recommend Neuromancer as well, too, because that also is coming true. For literature, Salman Rushdie, Midnight's Children. Everyone should read Midnight's Children. It's just art in words.
So some advice beyond that. I'm sure a burning question in many folks' minds. How does a company get on Google's radar?
So there's any founder, any CEO needs to balance the keep your head down and develop your product. But in terms of looking at your time, whether it's 70-30, 80-20, you do need to keep your head up. You do need to network. The Valley is a very networked place. And how companies get, first of all, if you're super successful, if you grow from 1 million users to 100 million users, you're going to be on the radar. But because not every company falls in that, there are people that I trust when they give me an inbound, when they give me a referral, that I will always follow up on. And building that network, spending, I don't know whether it's 5% of your time or 30% of your time, it kind of depends where your company is in its evolution, but spending time talking to people, whether they're product people at Google or venture capitalists, and just, it helps you because you'll get their perspective on what you're doing, and it also helps sort of build a little bit of connection with outside people on what you're doing so that word gets to people like me or senior product leads at Google, that generally it is trusted people telling me about companies that first gets companies on the radar. Yeah.
So along those lines, we have a number of startup founders and entrepreneurs in the room today. How do you advise founders to think about whether to stay the course and keep going independently or to have an exit?
It's my job to tell them that they need to exit immediately and to Google.
You all heard it here first.
But no, I try to, if you're onto something, if you're having that moment of traction, and sometimes that moment of traction is going from like 10,000 users to 100,000 users, that's special, and it happens to not as many people as it should happen, not as many companies as it should happen to, very bright people out there that don't get that kind of success. So if you find that kind of success, I would immediately put your head down and see where it can go. I think that's special. There will be a time to lift your head up when it's time to go public, or when it's time to bring in more money because you think you're onto something. And then maybe those are moments where talking to someone like me makes sense because you can achieve your vision and your goals better with us or inside us than on your own. But if you have that moment, stick with it.
Great. Well, I want to end by doing something I love called fill in the blanks. So I'm going to give you just a little prompt, and I'm going to ask you to complete the statement with the first word or phrase that comes to mind.
All right.
So first,
scared.
The next big company will likely come from?
Yeah, a great entrepreneur.
Who's probably sitting in this room, I think. So the best advice I could give an entrepreneur, besides to attend Startup Grind in their city, would be?
Focus on, find an idea that you're passionate about, focus on that idea, and just keep going. Keep trying to make that idea happen.
Uber is?
I think Uber is the future. If I can give a couple more words, I just think you're starting to see what mobile phones, as opposed to mobile being something that's old or even, starting to go behind us, mobile is new. We're just starting to figure out how we rework our lives based on having, powerful computers in our pockets, and Uber is an example of that. Really excited about, both the company, but also excited about what they're demonstrating can be done.
Next up on my personal travel bucket list is?
So I have 3 kids, so travel bucket for me is like going somewhere where I can quietly look after 3 children. So a nice beach somewhere in Mexico would be first on the list. One of them starting to get old enough where maybe Europe is something we can think about, but that's still a couple years out.
Startup valuations are?
Getting to the right place. starting to get to the right place.
And lastly, 3 words I would use to describe the entrepreneur's journey are?
All right, so fog, inspiration, and then grind.
Thank you very much, Don Harrison.